Hello, welcome to the Autism Recovery Summit number 2, Hope and Possibilities. I'm your host, Luminara Serdar, and I wanted to let you know that we still have our upgrade package available with all the presenters, all the video interviews, audio interviews, and a bunch of really cool bonuses, so go check that out. It's really wonderful to listen to these again and again. I always find new information each time. So yeah, feel free to go and get that. And today I'm so excited to have Dr. Amy Derksen here. Hi, Amy. She's a naturopathic physician and speaker. She studied biochemistry before becoming a naturopath. And so she really understands what's going on in the body and keeps up with the latest research on detoxification and genetic susceptibilities. She's a smart woman. She trained with Dr. Klinghardt for over 2 years, where she learned how to use his system of autonomic testing that helps with individualizing each person's protocol. And one of her passions is working with kids on the autism spectrum, but also with chronically ill patients. And we're talking today about her naturopathic insights and how to manage really complex non-responder type cases. Welcome, Amy. So glad to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, let's say someone is new to the diagnosis of autism out there, which we do have some people there, and we have practitioners as well, so they're going to learn a lot. Or we have someone who has a child who they've done a ton of things and they're not responding really well. What we call these the tough nuts, right? And maybe they've been to lots of doctors. Where would you start? What would you do?
That's always the biggest question, is where to start. And I think maybe the most daunting thing when I started, and then as my name got known, kids showing up my office had been to 20 of the names that you know as your mentors. And you're like, what would I have to offer? And so I realized it's really not that different if you're just starting versus if you have been on this journey a long time. You've missed something along the way. If your child isn't responding, there's something that you've missed. And I made things very complicated. I was a biochemist by nature. I overcomplicate things a lot. But the longer I've been in practice, I'm really realizing that we need to simplify it. So looking back at the diet, looking at the home environment, is there a mold exposure going on? Is there well water? Are there heavy metal exposures? Is there chemicals in the environment? Maybe there's a lot of pets and they're bringing in some infection or dander. Really looking at a lot of those variables first, and then looking at, can your child eliminate? Are their bowels moving? Are they drinking enough water? Are there urinary issues? Is there clean air? A lot of those things can really be the simple thing that you've been missing all along before you even get on the journey, kind of working up through the hierarchy.
So in your home could already be the key. That is if you just I'm not saying get rid of the family pet, but if that pet wasn't there, that certain exposure wouldn't be there, and then they wouldn't be constantly re-exposed.
Yeah. So, what I see with these kids, when I first started with Dr. Klinghardt, which was such a blessing, right out of school, coming in and being with someone who's been in medicine since the year I was born. And if he's listening, no offense to that, but, we were working with a lot of adults with chronic illness. And then we saw our first autistic child, and it's just so similar. It's just they reach that capacity. Their cup is full of toxins or whatever that is so soon. And so they're very vulnerable. I refer to the kids as sponges. They kind of soak up everything, but they're not eliminating really well. And so, if there is something in the air that's impairing air quality, or if there's an allergen exposure, it's just contributing either to the inflammatory or the toxic load. And it may be enough to kind of tip your child over the edge. So reducing that background load as much as you can allows then all these other treatments that you hear about to work so much better.
Okay, excellent. And that could be coming in from the food. That could be coming in from the water. Yeah. That could be coming in from the bedding chemicals or whatever else, right?
So many things, and it's overwhelming. I just got back from an environmental medicine conference, and, by the end of the conference, we're like, oh, okay, so we have to pull our teeth, and we have to not eat any food anymore, and we have to all these things. You're like, oh, where do I start,
Mm-hmm. So. Well, it's kind of the toxic soup we live in, and it's about managing it now.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, you talk about drainage,
Yeah.
and the healing process. So what does drainage have to do? What is drainage?
What is drainage? Yeah, that's, so the further I've gone along in my journey, the more I've gone back to my naturopathic roots, which is really first look at the cause of illness rather than trying to put a specific diagnosis on it. And drainage is really, how do we promote elimination? Elimination from the liver, the kidneys, the lungs. So a lot of times that's done with homeopathy. Sometimes that's done with simple things, some milk thistle, water, helping your child's bowels move. So many of these kids are so chronically constipated, and just, getting a little magnesium citrate and extra vitamin C and allowing them to eliminate daily allows that toxic burden to go down and allows you to get benefit from all these other treatments.
Okay. So it could be vitamin C, it could be a little bit of herbs, it could be some homeopathics. Yeah. How do you decide which is right for which person? I'm guessing everyone's a little different.
That is a good question, because I wish there was just a simple, here's the protocol. Everyone wants the protocol. I wish we had a protocol. So I use autonomic response testing. So I use a form of kinesiology that I teach for Dr. Klinghardt that helps me cut through it. But I also use intuition. I've been doing this a long time. Homeopathy for drainage works amazingly well. It's actually something we started in our office that anyone that's coming, whether it's an adult or a child, gets started with one of my naturopaths that just looks at kind of their constitution, some of the symptoms, like the full overall picture, and then picks certain drainage remedies based on those symptoms. But it comes down to homeopathy, and it really allows you to tolerate things. And sometimes even just with that, we have a 50% increase in symptoms, or improvement of symptoms, excuse me.
Mm-hmm. So. Okay. And then, I guess that's going to be individual, just like
it's very individual.
Our uniqueness.
We could keep it simple. And, one thing that we'll have a link for at the end of this is a long presentation that I've had breaking it down. Like, okay, if your child's liver numbers are always a little bit elevated, or you just know that they can't metabolize medications, they get really sick from them. Okay, let's look at liver support. And I have slides and slides of all the details of different things that are available that work, sort of doses. Some of those things, NAC, milk thistle, those always work well for the liver. Any of the homeopathics for the liver work great. And then for the kidneys, it's usually water and electrolytes. That's where I start.
You said NAC. Can you just tell people what that is?
Oh, NAC is N-acetylcysteine.
Okay, great. Thanks. Just for anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, for anyone who hadn't heard of it, just so they can.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of acronyms in this, and
right.
It's overwhelming.
Right. And so we're not going to get into every single detail today, but you actually have those details for people. We'll talk about that a little bit later, how they can get that.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. And then what about mitochondrial damage? We're hearing a lot about that. And I'm actually, new research is coming out saying like even cancer is a mitochondrial issue. So enlighten us about that.
Yeah. So my background being in autism, but also looking at chronic illness, and I'm a complete conference junkie, so I go to everything you can imagine. And the mitochondria, so mitochondria are within every cell, and they make ATP, which is the energy that I kind of think of it as the gas that runs the car. If you don't have, I don't care how fancy your car is, if there's no gas in the tank, it's not going to move forward. And a lot of times what we see is if we're jumping ahead to methylation support, or people come to my office, they want to treat Lyme disease and all these things, but your child isn't making any gas to run the car, you can't detox. And what we're finding is that all these factors in our environment, just like you were talking about, our food, our water sources, those things, is contributing to this oxidative stress that is really damaging those mitochondria. And when they're looking at any of these illnesses, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, MS, any of these diseases that we're seeing like really exploding right now, that damage has happened 10, 15 years before. But we're finding there's a lot of studies that a lot of these children started off at the beginning with impaired mitochondrial function.
How would that happen? I mean, you're talking about in utero, they have impaired mitochondrial
dysfunction? I have seen 2- and 3-year-olds with very severe mitochondrial dysfunction to the point that, lack of growth, lack of muscle development, they are exhausted. They can't even just go to the store without wanting to then take a rest. You can't get them to play. They have poor coordination. I think a lot of it comes back to maybe mom wasn't the healthiest or didn't realize she wasn't the healthiest. We are seeing a lot of autoimmunity. A lot of moms of children on the spectrum have some sort of, especially autoimmune thyroid condition that shows up later. So there was a toxic burden that was there. And so I think a lot of times we're starting off with some damage.
So mom doesn't know, she gets pregnant and she has all this toxic burden and it goes right to the baby, and then they are already starting at a little bit low gas in their tank.
There's a toxic burden, there's a big oxidative stress, and I think their mitochondria are impaired in that process because mom's mitochondria were impaired as well.
Okay, so if let's say I have a child who, is like you described, by 2-3 years old, they're so tired, they don't have the energy, their mitochondria are impaired, what can we do about it? I mean, is there hope for that?
Yeah, and I think even in the child where it's not so obvious, a lot of times if you're running, organic acid tests are run very often off the urine. And so if you're doing that, there'll be a lot of markers that'll show impaired mitochondrial function. And so in those cases, I find it comes down to there'll be a ton of things available, but acetyl L-carnitine and CoQ10 are by far on the top of my list. Mm-hmm. Creatine is another one, especially for kids with that impaired muscle function, muscle building, especially if they're not methylating really well. So especially in the low energy kids or the kids that are not talking. But really it comes down to carnitine and CoQ10. There's other things, alpha lipoic acid, vitamin E. There's a million other things we can look at, but I always go back to the simple.
Okay. And when you find like the acetylcarnitine, the creatine, the CoQ10, the vitamin E, all that stuff, are the kids taking it in? I'm curious. So, I mean, I see that we can throw supplements at kids, but is there anything you need to do first?
Yeah, is there anything you need to do first? So mitochondrial stuff you can start right away. It's not like you have to be detoxing or you have to do all these other things. You don't have to stand on your head or anything. You just have to get to the point that I think one of the hardest things is, as a parent, are you committed to moving forward with this? I think when you're treating mitochondria, it takes months to really get the impact we're looking for, because we're trying to repair the mitochondria in the neurological tissue, and anything absorbing through the gut, the mitochondria get greedy. And so they're going to take the first ones that it makes contact with are taking those nutrients. So our gut, and then it has to go through all the tissue. So often we don't see these huge gains for 2 to 3 months after. And so it's a commitment. I'm going to start this with my child and I'm going to keep going unless we see some sort of regression or, stimming sort of behavior. You're going to push through and reassess, a few months in. And then part of it is, how do you get your child to take some of these things? Maybe your child does better with liquids. Maybe they do better with powders. Maybe you teach your 2-year-old how to swallow capsules because they are very texture sensitive, but maybe they can swallow a capsule. And so part of it is detective work at the beginning. How do we make this as easy as possible? And there are some really nice formulations out there that people have put together that are like little packets. Like there's a packet called Mitospectra that has all the key nutrients in there. It's a flavorless powder that you can mix in. And that can be a nice way for some of those kids and parents where it's just not so overwhelming. It's not a million bottles of things.
Yeah, that can get overwhelming on its own, huh?
Yes, they can.
Okay. Anything else that we need to know, that parents need to know about mitochondria, or maybe what symptoms our kids might have to give them a clue that it might be mitochondria?
So if your child is on the spectrum, most likely they have mitochondrial concerns. Okay. In reality, especially if your child is kind of slow to grow, their coordination is off, they tend to have the very thin limbs, maybe that very pale skin that you can kind of see the veins through. I've definitely noticed with that. But just, they look tired. They kind of act tired. They're not, if you push them, if you've already started some of the biomedical treatments and let's say you push methylation and they do great and then they really regress, like they're having sort of a paradoxical reaction, I would be thinking mitochondrial damage. And we have to look at our environment. It's full of oxidative stress. And so we're all vulnerable to this. So doing mitochondrial support is not going to hurt anything.
And would you say that just a daily stress that either the parents or the child might come under can also contribute to that oxidative stress? Like pushing them to do therapies or pushing them to go to school or pushing,
I feel so blessed every day that my child is neurotypical, because the amount of stress that having a child on the spectrum puts on the household, and the stress that's there in most of our households is immense. And then when you add these therapies and your child is having aggressive behaviors, and it's a battle that is contributing to the toxic load, and also, your ability to cope. And kids are sponges emotionally too. And so the tension that forms between the parents, often one parent is on board and the other is not, or just the stress that it puts, is a huge piece. So working on the stress, I wish there was a magic pill to reduce that, but it's probably the most important, but yet the hardest thing to work on, but it can make the biggest impact.
Yeah. So what do you tell the parents about stress? What skills or, tips do you give them to help reduce the stress for the family, for the child, for themselves?
Yeah. So, a lot of times it's an interview process, so as I'm asking about the child, I'm also asking a lot about the family history. What are the dynamics? What is the support system there? Do we have a unit at home that's working together, or is it mom and she's always fighting with dad? If that's the case, let's get dad in and let's really talk to them so they can understand what's going on. And also, where are they willing to be at, and what personality type are the parents? If they're type A and they feel like they have to do everything right, part of it is like, okay, let's back off a little bit and give yourself credit. We can't control everything in the environment. We can't do every supplement we've ever read about, but let's choose the things that we can control. Okay, your child can't go off gluten and dairy for whatever reason. We'll just go off dairy, or go off gluten, or do it 90% of the time. It's better than nothing. Give yourself a little credit, and don't get so obsessed, I would say, with all of the therapies. I think therapies are great, like any of the behavioral therapies, and so many of these OT programs are great, but you also need time for a child to be a child and for the family to be able to breathe a little bit. So it's important.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, sometimes we forget about that stuff, right?
We do. And, and I see the extreme side of it, because I see parents coming with spreadsheets of all the things that they're on, and they do this day, and they've been on this journey for years, and they've lost the quality of life. I think that could be there, which is an important piece in the background.
Right. Well, actually it shouldn't be in the background, right?
Right. It should be the forefront.
Exactly.
Something, I know.
Yeah. So you talked about detox, and can you clarify what you mean by detox and how to do it safely?
Yeah. So, detox is sort of a hot word, and it's kind of funny. I'll have people that I've been working with for years, and they're like, well, when are we going to start to detox? And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not going to laugh, because, we've been detoxing from the beginning. So people have this idea of what that is. Detox just means that we're doing something to support reducing the overall burden. So that could be chelation, which is really the term given to specifically give something to grab heavy metals and pull those out of the body. So things like DMSA or DMPS or EDTA, or some of the binders. But detox can also be supporting methylation, supporting mitochondria, allowing some of these internal pathways to work to bring the toxic burden down. It can be sauna therapy, or, you've probably heard of the foot baths for kids. Any of these things really supporting that. And also the drainage that I talk about at the beginning to get those organs eliminating. That's step one of detox. It's anything you can do to reduce that overall burden.
And get that stuff out of the body and get their system.
And a lot of those nutrients, the key baseline nutrients that are in a lot of these multi-formulas, just some zinc and some B6 and a little magnesium. The reason those things are in there is they're nutrients that get depleted just from our environment, and we don't have a lot in our food sources. But all of these, if you look at genetics or you look at any of these pathways, they're dependent on those nutrients to function. And so that's where we replace that to turn the function of those things back on again.
So if we have someone listening whose child only eats 5 things,
like most people listening probably are in that category.
So we really need to get them either eating better, well, whatever, or on some of these supplements that, like the vitamins that have the B6, the magnesium, the things you were talking about.
And I don't do a lot of multivitamins. I find a lot of times there might be something in there your child is sensitive to, or there's too many ingredients or some sort of filler. So I'm not usually a huge fan of a big multi. But some of those key nutrients, minerals are really important. Like the multi-minerals are fantastic. Some of the specific B complex vitamins, if your child can tolerate it without getting too stimmy, can be really important.
And
fish oil.
Really fish oil. Really probiotics.
Probiotics, sometimes important. I'm actually on the fence with that. Some of my kids that are pretty sensitive seem to react to the probiotics. I think early on in your journey, absolutely probiotics are great. Probiotics are the natural gut flora. It really helps build your defense against some of these opportunistic things like yeast or candida, parasites, some of those things. So that's a great place to start. For the more complicated kids, we might find that they actually react poorly to those probiotics. So we actually may have to do some killing first.
Why do you think they react poorly or they're sensitive to them?
So what I see is there's a subset of kids that really get into this imbalance of like the Th1, Th2 pathway. So they get this immune dysregulation. And what happens is they overreact to everything. They react to every food. You know, you run a food allergy test or you find that they react to everything, rashes and circles under their eyes or their lips. They react to everything. They react to the environment. They react to any supplements that they've been on for more than a few days. It just gets into this battle. And what we find is they also start to react to their own gut bugs. So, you know, we'll have these recurrent Clostridia infections or parasite issues or candida issues that just don't seem to go away. And, you know, they start to even respond to Acidophilus and bifidus. And so part of it is in those, we really have to work on calming down that immune system, getting it back into a better balance.
Well, what do you do for that?
What do I do for that?
Yeah.
I can't tell you. We'll wait for the next one. No. You know, I really like low dose antigen therapy. So LDA, also considered to be LDI is a sort of a subset of that, going after some of the specific microbes. But I usually start with LDA to work on foods and environmental factors, again, to bring down that overall inflammatory burden. Low dose naltrexone can be a fantastic one to just sort of reset that. Natural antihistamines for the gut can be very helpful. You know, our vitamin C's, aloe, quercetin is a really good one if they tolerate that. There's a prescription called ketotifen. There's things that we can look at to kind of downregulate that. And I think it depends on the child. Like, where's the source of the fire, essentially? And oftentimes it's the gut, you know, and that's where, you know, every child that comes to my practice, before I even see them, I'm running an organic acid test and a stool test, because I'd like a snapshot to look at where are we starting at? You know, do we have strong immune reactions or not? Are they reactive to a lot of things? Are there a lot of bugs thriving that shouldn't be? Where, you know, where's the fire? And then looking at the organic acid test to get an idea of B vitamin status and microbes and mitochondria and all these, glutathione production, all of these things.
Right. So you're going to look at all these different factors and go, oh, this one is the most out of balance. Let's see what we can do
to there.
Yeah.
But,
okay.
You know, really, it gets into there's a fire somewhere. Where is it starting? And most likely it's coming from the gut.
Okay, great. I wanted to just skip back a little bit because I had a question. You said you don't usually give a multivitamin because of some sensitivities, but you do use certain vitamins and certain minerals. You use a specific brand, or do you test different brands? You know, different people maybe test differently. Can you tell us about that?
So, you know, I muscle test everything, and I'm in a little bit different category because I'm known for working with the sensitive kids. So the kids that fall into my lap are the ones who maybe have had some particular things. In general, I really like Thorne. I find they're a clean, very clean product, and my most sensitive kids tend to do well with them. I like that they keep up on the research. They have the right forms of all the nutrients in there, and it's a clean product. Pure Encapsulations is also a pretty clean product, though the doses and some of those things can be a little bit low. And then Seeking Help, which is Ben Lynch's company, has some really great products and some nice chewables and lozenges and things, you know, for kids that aren't swallowing pills. They've got some really nice forms, especially with when you get into the methylation support. And they have a healthy that seems to be well tolerated as well.
But it's really going to be individual, and you're working with some of the more sensitive ones, but some who aren't more sensitive, there might be a whole bunch of other things that
there might be a whole bunch. You know, Kirkman makes some nice products as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's some additives in there, but they tend to work well. Their enzymes are fantastic. You know, there's so many companies out there.
Yeah.
That are great, and so it's not to like shun any of those other companies.
Right.
But it's sometimes to look at, okay, let's look at the ingredient list. You know, I don't want folic acid. I always want there to be, you know, I want it to be a natural folate or a methylfolate or a folinic. So what are the ingredients? How researched is this company? You know?
Yeah. So I guess that's just a point that, you know, the practitioners like you, yourself, you really have to know a lot about all this stuff to recommend the right thing. I find that too. Supplements are sometimes like, that takes the longest time because there's so much out there and you want to get just the right one.
You want to get the right one. And, a lot of times what I see, and, even with my own child, it's like, okay, do I really give these 5 individual things, or do I just grab this multi that's at the store in a gummy form that he'll take and I battle, and so there's no judgment. I mean, that's number one, what I tell families that come to see me, zero judgment. And I maybe had more judgment before I had a child. Yeah, now it's a whole new thing, okay, how are we going to do this? That's okay. You chose a gummy vitamin. I have no problem with that, but let's find something a little bit better that's more nutrient dense. And I think the thing for parents who have been on this journey for a while, even if you've tried something before and it supposedly didn't work, it might be that you used the wrong product. Maybe it wasn't absorbable for your child, or maybe there was something in there that was interfering with how effective it was. Mm-hmm. We see that a lot with even the B12 injectables, that certain formulations tend to work better than others. And so it's very dependent on
that's good to know. And I think that's hopeful for parents who are like, I've tried multivitamins, I've tried zinc, and I've tried this and I've tried that there's, not to keep you in forever land of going to try new things, but really to get the help of someone who does muscle testing, who can say this one really doesn't test well for your child, and this one, wow, this is really great, and I know it doesn't have junk in it.
Test, or someone who knows kind of the science behind these things, and maybe that, if your child doesn't do well with zinc, maybe it's because they are deficient in B6, because they need that cofactor for it to work properly. So someone that can think that through. For me, muscle testing I treat it like a second opinion. I overthink everything. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of ideas, and then I get a child on the table, and sometimes my ideas are proven to be wrong, or it becomes really clear that there's something there. So it takes some of the guesswork out of it. So it's a nice skill set to have in there, and parents can learn how to do this as well. There are a lot of great ways, just, pendulum testing or muscle testing, just to go, is this a good thing or a bad thing?
Can you, I know we've been talking about muscle testing, but can you just expand a little bit for those people who've never heard of it, a brief description of what is muscle testing? What are you actually doing?
What are you actually doing? So muscle testing, also called kinesiology, there's a million different ways that this can look. Some people use arm length testing, or a little pendulum that you wave around. The way we do it in my office is I'm actually a surrogate, and someone's pushing on my arm as I'm contacting a child. But often you'll have someone that's pushing directly on you. There's a feedback system in our body when we're introduced to something. Either we eat something, or it's held on a meridian that has parasympathetic and sympathetic innervation. It causes a response. There's a signal that goes up to the brain that then comes out through some of our nerves and creates a response of usually a strength or a weakness. And so, like my arm will be out and someone's actually pushing to see, is it strong or weak? Or someone, if your arm is up, they would just be pushing on you that way. And often we can find, you introduce something there, you introduce a Lyme organism or heavy metals or a supplement, and it creates a weakness in the body or a big stress response. And what we're looking for is a change, and then to see what relieves that change. So it can be crazy sometimes. I'll have all these theories. Like I had a child that came to me that, I was like, oh gosh, it's got to be methylation driven. And I got them on the table and it was so obvious, parasites. I've never seen such a strong reaction. And it was such a hard sell for me with this family. But literally within the first 2 doses of starting the antiparasitics, the behaviors almost completely went away. And wow. So it's been nice, because without that skill, I would have never thought parasites with that child. So.
Right. And like you said, parents can learn it themselves at home, and you could probably just go onto YouTube and say muscle testing or applied kinesiology and get a good view of different ways that people are doing it and teaching it.
Yeah. And what I'll have is in the link that I have of my presentation, I'll put a link there of some of my favorite ones. So if someone's wanting to learn this skill set, I teach with the Klinghardt Academy, which is really more geared towards practitioners. We're trying to come up with some more simplified ones for parents, because I don't think you need to know 3 days worth of how to test every little thing. Mm-hmm. The thing I would encourage, though, is muscle testing does not replace good medicine. So don't try to just treat your child based on the testing you're doing at home. It can get a little tough. When my patients are testing at home, they completely change the plan that we have going. And I would rather that they're using that to give me some feedback if this seemed to be stressful, and giving the feedback with me, and not really changing the plan too much, because you do have to understand how all these things work together.
Right. That's a good key point. Thank you. And you mentioned methylation, and that's another hot topic. So yeah, can you say how you, just what it is, and then how you would address it, just kind of the whole topic of it for anyone who hasn't ever heard of it before?
Yeah, so methylation is kind of the hot term that everyone's talking about right now, or you might have heard the word MTHFR, which is one of the genes that they're testing for, but it's one gene in a sequence of many genes that essentially play off each other to help us utilize and create methyl B12 to make SAMe and to drive a lot of the detox process in the body to help make glutathione, which is our main antioxidant protection. And so it's probably the most impacted component in our kids or in someone who is become quite ill as an adult that needs to be repaired. And you will see, if you're looking at methylation, you're going to see so much information. Oh, this protocol says you have to take this little speck of B12 and this amount of folate and all these things in combination. And for some people that is the case. I find for the kids, the biggest impact is definitely the B12 shots, methyl B12 shots. You know, I'm a huge fan of Dr. Newbrander and his protocol that he started so long ago, and because it works and he has the data that really backs that up. But in my experience, my first recovered child was because of B12 shots. And this is a child that I had been doing sublingual B12 with for a long time and hadn't seen anything. And so I do feel like sometimes we just have to kind of push through as long as the mitochondria are up to the task. Because if there's not that underlying energy there, we will see just a lot of aggression that happens with that, and we won't start to see some of those gains.
So this is one of those things, when you do all your testing in the beginning, you would look to see, oh, do they need methylation, or do they really need the mito support first, or do they need something else first?
Right. So often what I look at is, I'll look at that organic acid test, and if it looks like the mitochondria are doing okay, you know, I'm not seeing a lot of abnormal markers, gut seems to be okay, because, you know, we don't want to push a lot of B vitamins if there's a big mess in the gut. You know, if you've got a ton of yeast or a ton of bacterial overgrowth, especially if we're starting with something oral, those B vitamins really feed those bugs. So I want to get that under control first. And I often do kind of a test run before we even jump to the injections, because most families, if they're just starting, like, to consider giving your child a shot up to possibly every day is daunting, you know? Yeah. And so often we'll start with the sublingual and see, do we see anything? And if we don't, let's jump to it. Or if we see a lot of lab evidence that really this is methylation related, then often the parents are ready to jump to it. It really depends where they're at, though.
So is methyl B12 the thing that you do for methylation, or are there other things as well?
There's no the thing I do for anything. So it is at the top of my list of how do we get them ready to do methyl B12. And if they've tried it and have done really poorly with it, what have we missed that they need to support? I do a lot of methylfolate and folinic acid as well. Once we've supported the B12, I do a lot of zinc. You know, there's something called cryptopyruluria, or KPU, that we're finding in kids, which is basically you're peeing out most of your zinc and B6. So none of those pathways work right. A lot of times what you'll find in those kids is they're getting sick all the time. Every month it's another illness. You just can't get off that train. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking KPU in that child, and maybe they have a very low creatinine or a low white blood cell count on labs. And so a lot of times we start with that. So we're doing our drainage. We're doing very high doses, 30, 60, 90 milligrams of zinc picolinate typically. I'm starting some B6 to make sure that they can tolerate that, usually 50 milligrams of B6. Mm-hmm. And then we get into some of our other B vitamins, and then I get into folate.
Okay.
You know, mitochondrial stuff has come in along the way. Gut support has come in along the way. And then we can get fancier. If we don't see the changes with that, it's not tolerated, we're not seeing something, that's where, you know, and I will muscle test. And if it's finding like they're super deficient in a lot of things, I may be more aggressive with that child. It really depends what they've done, how they're presenting, you know, and how clean everything else is.
So you said in the cryptopyruluria that they were peeing out B6 and zinc. What's not working well that because they're taking it in their vitamins or whatever food.
So there seems to be some damage and a deficiency that's starting from the beginning. And often we'll find that the same pattern is happening with mom. Like a very easy test to look for this is a zinc tally test or a zinc taste test.
Yeah.
It's a really easy thing to do in the office, or that you could even do at home. So a lot of times what I find, if I'm suspecting that's the case, because I haven't been able to draw blood on many of my patients, it's just not a possibility. You know, holding down a screaming child, sometimes it's not worth it at the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, but you can do a little taste test. And if you have adequate zinc stores, it tastes really bitter, but if you don't, it doesn't taste like anything, or it tastes good. And so even on, you know, I had a 1-year-old that came to my office that's nonverbal, but you can read the cues on a child's face. You give them a little drink, it's just like water. If they are like, give you that horrible, like, what have you done to me look, or they spit it out, you know, okay, they probably have adequate zinc status. And if what happened, nothing, then you know they don't taste it, because it should taste pretty bad. And so usually what I'll do is I'll do that, and then I check the parents and the siblings as well, because often we see these patterns run in the families. And you know, we've done a lot of testing on this. You can actually do a urine test that you would freeze and send off, but most people, it was impacted. So I stopped spending the money on that and just got back to doing the treatment. You know, we did a study early on with Clean Heart, and I would say, I think it was 95% of the kids came back with a very significant cryptopyroluria concern.
So you can almost tell, just like they're pretty deficient in other things, or the mitochondrial
And you can
issue.
pretty much assume, I think most of the seasoned doctors, even when they come up with their own formulation, like their step 1 multi that they have created for their kids has zinc, magnesium, B6, and probably a few other nutrients in there too. And there's a reason, because we just get really deficient in that.
Yeah. Wow. And I think I heard you say earlier, but these get deficient because of all that, what we're doing in detoxing, those get used up the most.
So it can be from emotional stress. It can be generational. We actually find if it was impacted in mom, that kids are just born with that kind of sensitivity. It tends to, at times of stress, cryptopyroluria, those pathways don't work as well. So actually would be a bigger increase of making those pyrols.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And let's shift a little bit and talk about inflammation and immune dysregulation.
Yeah.
What do you see in these kids, these tough ones that you're working with?
Oh my gosh. So, you know, we had suspected this years ago. You know, when I was working with Clean Heart, we were working a ton with Lyme disease and co-infections. And, you know, some of the questions that came up is, you know, when you have an adult or you have a child who's been on antibiotics for years, and the second you go off those antibiotics, all the symptoms are back. You know, or I had a child, and this one was so, I mean, it's so profound to me. Had been on fluconazole, which is diflucan, a prescription anti-candida medicine, for I think 3 years straight. And they had missed one day. Now this has a 3-day half-life. They had missed one day, and already rash on the cheeks, the red ears, all of the symptoms. And I remember at that time saying, I think it's actually an allergy to the yeast and not the yeast burden, because there's no way, like, yeast just propagates.
Can grow that fast.
This doesn't happen, you know? And so I'm seeing a lot of that. You know, we're seeing more allergies. It's not uncommon that there'll be 3 or 4 children in a classroom now with a severe peanut allergy, you know, and that was unheard of before. There'd be 1 child in the entire school. So we're seeing an increase in allergies. We're seeing an increase in this immune dysregulation just across the board. And they put allergies and eczema on the same spectrum as autism when you look at the driving force behind what's triggering that. And so, you know, we're looking at, that's where it comes back to, let's look at cleaning up the environmental load. I love the low-dose antigen, or the LDA therapy for this, which is drops under the tongue every 7 weeks. I mean, it doesn't get much easier than that.
Right.
But then, you know, we're looking at some of these other nutrients. Curcumin can be fantastic. I think also supporting glutathione, and probably giving glutathione. You know, back in the early days of Defeat Autism Now, which is the DAN movement, they did a survey, and they were finding, I think 99% of the kids had almost non-detectable glutathione levels when they were measured in labs. And so they're just not making that. And that's our main antioxidant. Under oxidative stress, cells misbehave, and they start sending out all these cytokines and the wrong signals. And so we get into a problem, and it's about getting back in balance.
That makes a whole lot of sense, that if we are really loaded with these environmental toxins, and our glutathione is that main antioxidant and the main detox, it of course makes sense that it's going to be run down.
It's going to be run down, because either all the nutrients that got to that point have gotten depleted, or now you're making all this oxidized glutathione that doesn't work, or maybe you have a gene SNP that you couldn't make it really well in the first place. And so it's, that's where we get into trying to repair all those little steps ultimately to get you making those things.
And so do you give kids, I heard the LDA and the stuff you do for the immune system, but what about you give the glutathione, or that's back to the methyl B12 and all the methyl vitamins?
Yeah. And, I don't give every single thing that we're talking about to every single child.
Yeah.
You have to look at, like, I give them all to some kids. I've had some really big protocols. The glutathione seems to be really important. If you run some of those labs, often you'll see indicators of that. If you know there's high chemicals, maybe you run a chemical test and you see a lot of chemicals, the glutathione can be very effective, or you can do a trial. It's not going to hurt anything unless your child is just really reactive to sulfur compounds, and you'll know because within a few days they're actually just not behaving well. They maybe have a headache, so they're doing some posturing like this, or they're just getting really ornery. But the liposomal glutathione is how you have to go. And probably my favorite for kids is by Research Nutritionals. They just came out with a watermelon flavor one that tastes really good, which is the problem. Glutathione is really sulfury, like smells like eggs, tastes worse than that. And, our kids are so texture and smell sensitive that sometimes it is like, yeah, forget that. That's not going in. The second that goes in with your vitamins, they're not taking anything anymore. And so this new flavor has really helped. It's a good product, but you almost don't taste the sulfur in that at all.
That's great. And so I know that there are powder forms of glutathione and there are precursors to glutathione.
Yeah.
That you can give. Would you say that the liposomal glutathione is always the best option, or does it just depend?
So in my experience, the liposomals, it's the only way. The precursors can be helpful. So especially when we're looking at milk thistle, a little bit of dandelion, and acetylcysteine, or the NAC that we talked about earlier, having those precursors can be important. And a lot of times I'm actually giving glutathione and I'm giving the precursors, like Designs for Health makes immunodetox, which I really like. It's phase 2 liver support, but has all those precursors in it to help you make glutathione. There's another product called Clearway cofactors that I use for those that have a lot of SNPs related to not making glutathione properly. But the immunodetox seems to be good because I like to give the glutathione, but I also like to give the precursors to make sure, because there is a negative feedback loop that once you've made enough glutathione, that your body sends signals to say, hey, let's slow down this pathway so you don't make so much. And so I want to keep pushing things in that are giving the other signals of like, yeah, let's push this pathway and let's keep it going. So we're not getting so dependent on that. But liposomal, by far the way to go. Transdermal from a compounding pharmacy has been effective. IV form is amazing.
Okay. And the transdermal, I know there's also some creams that aren't prescription as well.
Yeah,
that aren't
so that can work. In my experience, does not work as well as the oral.
Okay.
So if you can do the oral liposomal, and there's other brands that are really good. Quicksilver is good. ReadySorb is good. Sometimes that's easier. So if you already have a lot of liquids that have maybe a sweetener to them, then those can go in with those liquids very easily. Another, if your kid doesn't like sweet taste, then they're probably not going to like the watermelon flavored thing because it tastes just like a Jolly Rancher, and maybe they don't. I personally like it. The watermelon ones were my favorite growing up. So,
well, my question about that, I always worry about the flavorings. Are they like going to then be toxic for the child?
Yeah, no. So that's good. So I like that particular company because they've used good choices of ingredients to help sweeten that and flavor that. But you have to be careful with any of these things. So many of the gummies and the liquids and the things that you find, most of them are using sucralose, which is horrifying to me. Some use aspartame. Most of them don't anymore, but for a long time they did. But even some of what you think are the best, the things that are hyped so much, have these artificial sweeteners that are stimulants. They're neuroexcitatory. They can make our kids go a little bit bonkers. And so we're getting good nutrients in, but we're also making them toxic from some of the additives. So you really have to start looking at ingredients. And that's where everything that goes into the pharmacy that I have, we've screened really closely so that we're as aware as we can be of some of those things in there.
And that's a really good reason to work with somebody who knows this kind of information, like, to work with you or another practitioner or a company that you say like Thorne, who's done the research and they keep up with things.
Yeah. It's always good to have someone who can help guide you on this, because on a day-to-day basis, my son had actually really severe eczema and allergies, and I still needed to reflect off of other people, because it's tough, as a parent, we're so close to it. Our motives for treating them is a little bit different. And sometimes you do need that objective view, and you definitely need someone who knows more than you do about some of these things.
Yeah, exactly.
But still trust your parent instinct, or your mama, as we call it. Seriously, I learn more about the child from the parents. You just have to learn to listen, and then I can help put it together. But
yeah, that's great. Well, then that's that other piece of someone listening objectively. Whereas, as a parent, I might think this, and I'm telling you all this stuff, and you're going, aha, I see a pattern. I see this is what's happening. And then you can reflect that back, and I might not even be aware of it,
Right.
Because I'm so close.
Right.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned parasites and yeast, candida microbes. So where does that fit in the picture, and what do we do about it?
Yeah. So, I think that comes a little bit later, and it's, for some kids, we start at the beginning. They're very opportunistic. And so it is not uncommon that we will have a child that's 2 or 3 years old that has immense overgrowth of everything. And this is a child who's never traveled. They've never done anything unusual, but they're full of parasites. They have so much yeast. It's just something has gotten dysregulated. Probably methylation wasn't working properly. Our immune barrier, we now have a leaky gut. We have these things that allows these bigger protein molecules through. And so as soon as that gets impacted, things go in and they thrive. They love to, just stay there. Or you get exposed to Lyme disease, which I feel that most of us have been, but the immune system is so impacted that it goes straight to an inflammatory response with that. And so it contributes to the load. So, often I start with the gut. So if I will look at some of those labs. I do feel like looking at those labs is important. I will muscle test, but you can look at the labs. I will see what we're dealing with, and then I will get something brought in, whether it's an herbal product, maybe it's just probiotics, or maybe it's prescriptions. A lot of times the prescriptions can be really good. Diflucan is a Th1, Th2 modulator. So it really helps with the immune dysfunction as well as that. Improving the gut barrier. Butyrate can be really amazing for that, or even just some of the fibers can be really nice for that, or slippery elm, something like that can be good.
What do you mean some of the fibers? What do you mean by
like
fibers?
Acacia fiber, which is a water-soluble fiber, or even if you think of like zeolite, not really a fiber, but you could look at, I don't use a ton of psyllium, though it can work well. The pectins work very well for some kids. They do really well with like a chlorella. So some sort of binding bulking agent can work great, because our body will naturally try and detox these toxins through the liver, comes out through the bile, it goes into the gut, and then it would reabsorb if it doesn't come out. And so if you get some of these things in there, it's going to mop that up and help it just go out and poop.
Okay. Yeah. And they get reabsorbed, especially if the kids are constipated and things aren't moving through.
Absolutely. And then where does it go? Who knows? Maybe it went from a pretty benign spot to now it gets reabsorbed and goes right into the nervous system. So you have to be careful.
Okay. Wow. And so you're saying that you'll look at some of these other factors before you look at the microbes. I'm curious why, if there's, okay.
So when someone comes to see me, they're coming for a few days, and we're looking at all of it. I have a pile of labs. I have the child in front of me. I'm muscle testing. I'm reviewing a very extensive history, and it's like, okay, what has been missed? Where do we go? And sometimes you can see huge fire alarms. We've got a crazy yeast infection. If we don't treat that, nothing's going to happen. Or you've got Clostridia through the roof. Your child is punching holes in the wall and chewing their shirt up. They've got Clostridia. We've got to treat that before we do anything. So, it's putting it all together, learning how to step back and observe a little bit, learning how to use some of these tools to put it together, and customizing it. And I wish it was easier than that, but it's pretty complicated.
It sounds like it is. I mean, I find this too, and it sounds like every single person is going to be different. Their whole background's going to be different. Their lineage, their parents, their ancestry, whatever gets put into that. Their emotional stuff is going to be different. Their stress levels are going to be different.
But I think, so one thing, I'll just kind of hold this up. So there's like a hierarchy, and I presented this at Autism One last year, and I will present it again this year in a little bit different way. But it's how we are approaching any of the patients in our practice, that you start with a foundation and then you work your way up. And I see the same thing with kids. And when I talk to doctors that are more experienced than I am, or they've been doing this a lot longer than I have, we take a look at what really works. Mitochondrial support works. Methylation support, especially the B12, it works. glutathione works. Those are things that are going to need to work, because ultimately we have to get the body process working better, and then it can put out those fires on its own. If we can repair that, it's going to deal with the bugs. Sometimes when it's crossed over and this has been going on long enough, you've got to reduce that load while you work on the repair.
Right. So it sounds like you just look at all the pieces and go, where's the fire? And we work on that, but then we don't forget all these other ones that are happening
in the background. You still got to build it back up, because I think the biggest mistake I made, and that I think a lot of parents have made when they've been on this journey, is we're always putting out a fire, and we forgot that sometimes you have to go back to the foundation and build it up, or the fires are never going to stop.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Now, we're talking about really biochemical, biomedical stuff, all this stuff happening in the body. But, as a parent listening, they'd be like, well, I just want my kid to stop pooping, smearing poop on the wall, or to start pooping, or to stop, hitting the walls, or stimming, or flying all over the place. So, these are the things that we see and that parents have to deal with every day, or they just want their kid to talk. So what you're talking about going on in the body, can you correlate that to those behaviors and what you see?
Well, and that's where you have to look at, the child smearing poop on the wall, or constantly, inserting their finger and putting it in their mouth. Obviously, there's a gut issue going on. So a stool test could tell you a lot, or you could do something very broad and basic. You could do something like Botanifuge, which is an herbal blend for them, or you could do maybe some papaya seeds or some pumpkin seeds, or something very broad. Maybe start just with some probiotics and some butyrate. Could be really good to see, do we see some changes? And let's look at what is the dietary exposure looking like? Am I giving my child a lot of carbohydrates? Because a lot of times when you go gluten-free, you're just going to a lot of these simple carbs. You're doing a ton of rice, a ton of corn that has a really high glycemic index, and you're just feeding bugs. And so sometimes it's, you can start with that. But I really think you have to read the symptoms, because the spectrum of autism is so broad. Right. Someone may be coming, like you said, because their child doesn't talk, but they're really calm. They have no digestive issues, none of those things. That's a different case than the child with the distended belly that's acting out and beating, holes in the wall. They've got an issue with their gut.
And as a parent who's seeing symptoms, when you take care of the inside of the body, what do you see with these symptoms?
What do I say? Oh, the symptoms can improve immediately. When you work on the gut, so you've got to think of the gut. I think the gut makes 60 to 80% of our neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are things like GABA, dopamine, the things that control our mood. And a lot of our immune system is stemming from the gut and that lymphatic tissue. And so when you have an organism there that's out of control, things go haywire. So often with bacteria or Clostridia, we'll see the aggression. We see, and maybe there's no actual pooping issues, flat belly, child poops daily, but yet you see these waves of aggression that come out of nowhere and literally biting themselves raw. You have those kids that are just biting to the point of bleeding. That is a bacterial issue. And sometimes within a single dose, I've seen it all change. It's amazing.
That's what I think parents want to hear is oh my gosh, my kid's doing all this stuff. And you can look at the inside and you can take their history and you can take their thing and go, oh, let's just do this.
Right. Let's do this. And if that doesn't work, let's do this. And sometimes, if you're going after parasites, we might have to do 6 different antiparasitics in sequence, and we'll find, whoa, one of them is magic. Right? Let's figure out what the magic pill is for your child, because it's never the same for the next one. But
of course not. So if someone is out there listening going, oh my God, I just have to go see Dr. Amy, and I have to do all this stuff for my child. Are you taking new patients? How can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I've just started taking new patients again. I hadn't for many years. And so they would call the office. I can give our website is holistichealingarts.org. Office phone number 425-582-7678. So typically they would start, there's another doctor in my office, Dr. Wakely, that starts at the beginning. So basically he will order all the labs that you want to do, and we'll start with that foundational drainage piece, gather a history. We have grand rounds where we talk with all the doctors in my practice, assign it to the doctor that's best for you, or if you're wanting to see me specifically, you would get on my schedule. That's not a problem. And so, but you would start with him because he's going to do the groundwork so that we can really get to it. by the time you see me or one of the other practitioners.
Excellent. Thank you. Because I know people want to, I just have a feeling people want to come see you. And now you have a gift for our listeners. You referred to it, you've already, but this is amazing. So can you just explain it in a little more detail?
Yeah. So I've done a lot of PowerPoints for presentations over the years. And my biggest frustration when I go to conferences is there's a lot talked on the research, but none of the nuts and bolts about like, okay, how do I do this? What is the actual product that works? What's the dose that tends to be tolerated? So I've put together things and I've condensed something down for this particular group that goes through a lot of the things we've talked about. It goes through that hierarchy of where do you start? And we'll give the details of different products that I use, the doses we would use if you're wanting to support different organ systems, or you're wanting to treat, like, your kid has Clostridia. I talk about my favorite Clostridia treatments, the doses, the kind of schedule that you'd look at, just to give you ideas or to give your practitioner some ideas of what to think about. And so there's a lot of information there if you're wanting just to educate yourself a little more, whether it's to have the questions that you can ask of your doctor or that you just get started on.
And so if they see this and they go, oh, this is the dosage, this is that. I mean, do you recommend that they also have someone to guide them, someone who really knows like those back end things you were talking about how the things.
It's really, really important that you have someone who understands this process, because herbs are medications as well, so we can cause some problems with any of these things. So you have to be really careful. Like, I put doses on there, but I'm not saying, great, do all of these things, because it can be dangerous for some kids. I put on there what tends to work, the things that I feel comfortable with. But it is really good to have someone who understands this, that can say, oh, for your child right now, that's not a good idea. Or, oh, you're having this reaction. This is what this means.
Good point. And then I think also you were going to include in that, you were talking about the things that might be re-triggering kids at home.
Yeah.
And so home things people could do.
Home things. So in there's a few slides on the things that you can take care of before you ever go to the doctor. I was involved in a think tank probably 10 years ago at this point with some of my favorite doctors. And we sat down and talked about what are the things that we wish all patients did before they ever came to see us. What would make our job easier so that we could really get to it and get the progress that we're wanting. And so it goes through the details of how do you look at your home environment? Where do you start? How do you look for EMF exposures? How do you look for molds? How do you look for some of these things, or just some of the things, just a list to start to think of. And there's not every bit of information that you could ever need here, but at least it gets you thinking. It's like, oh, I haven't addressed that piece. And it's not about feeling guilty about any of these things. It's about giving you some ideas of what have I maybe not looked at cleaning up before I go to some doctor and start putting a bunch of things in my child. Sometimes it's what do we take away first?
Right. Well, that's a really valuable gift, to give a lot of specific guidance to parents, but also what you do before you even go into the doctor. That's really an amazing thing, that especially for someone who's just starting off and they're all confused and there's so much information out there. That's a great starting point. Thank you so much for putting that together. And Dr. Amy, thank you so much for being here and putting your heart and wisdom into this interview.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me.
So welcome. And thanks everyone for listening.
Mm-hmm.